The night clung to the desert like a shroud, heavy and restless. The wind curling through the canyon walls with a voice that sounded almost human, half sigh, half scream. The fire crackled in the center of the Apache camp, its glow painting the towering cliffs in hues of orange and shadow. Beyond the flames, horses shifted restlessly, their silhouettes cutting against the star-scattered sky, while warriors sat in a wide circle, their eyes glinting like predators under the moon. And in the middle of it all sat Eleanor Briggs, her wrists bound with leather cords, her back pressed against a cedar post driven into the ground. 30 years old, her face was pale, streaked with dust and tears, though her green eyes sharp, defiant, betrayed no surrender. The heat from the flames kissed her skin, but the night wind bit colder, slicing into her through the thin fabric of her riding dress. She fought to keep her breathing steady. Fear, like a wild animal, clawed inside her chest, but she would not let them see it. A shadow broke from the circle. He walked like a storm carried in human form, barefoot, muscular, his chest broad and glistening with sweat despite the chill. Tribal paint marked his skin in bold strokes, and a heavy necklace of carved bone and turquoise rested against him, swaying with each step. His long black hair spilled over his shoulders like ink, catching the firelight. The Apache warrior stopped. Before her, crouched low so his face was level with hers, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. His eyes dark, unyielding, burning with something deeper than cruelty, locked onto hers. He leaned in, so close that Eleanor could smell the wild earth on him, the smoke of cedar wood, the salt of his sweat. His lips brushed against her ear, as he whispered in a voice that was both threat and promise, "Your body is just mine." The words sank into her like a blade twisting slow. The fire roared louder in her ears, the voices of the warriors hushed into silence, and the world seemed to contract until only she and this man existed. Her heart hammered so hard she feared it might betray her defiance. But Eleanor Briggs was not a woman to break easily. She lifted her chin, though her bound hands trembled against the cords, and her voice, soft, hoarse, but steady, slipped from her lips. "No. It already belongs to someone else." A ripple of laughter moved through the men around the fire, low and cruel, as though her protest amused them. But the warrior before her did not laugh. His face remained carved of stone, yet his eyes, those piercing, restless eyes, darkened further, as though her words had reached a place even he had not expected. Eleanor held his gaze, though every instinct screamed at her to look away. She thought of Thomas, her husband, and the memory anchored her like a chain. 2 years had passed since the day she lowered him into the Wyoming earth, since she knelt in the dirt with his blood on her hands. 2 years since the cattleman came and left her a widow. Still, her body remembered his touch, her heart carried his voice, and she wore his ring on a chain around her neck, a ring that pressed against her skin now like a shield between her and the warrior's gaze. The fire popped, sparks bursting upward, and Eleanor realized her lips were trembling. Not from fear, though fear was there, but from the strain of holding on to herself in the face of a man who seemed to strip the very air from her lungs. The warrior leaned back slightly, his jaw tight, the muscles in his shoulders shifting under firelight. Around them, the other Apaches murmured to one another, watching with predators' patience. To them, she was nothing but a captured white woman, fragile, disposable, a pawn in some larger game. Yet in the way this man studied her, she sensed something else. Something heavier. Eleanor swallowed hard, her throat dry. She knew the danger. A woman captured in the Old West by warriors had little chance of survival and less still of dignity. And yet, though her body trembled against the ropes, though her heart screamed of the peril she was in, she clung to the memory of Thomas like a lifeline. "No," she whispered again, her voice firmer this time. "You can whisper your claim all you like. But my body, my heart, my soul, they are not yours to take." For the briefest moment, she thought she saw something flicker across his face. Not anger, not even desire, but something rawer, almost human. And then it was gone. The night wind surged, lifting strands of her hair across her face, carrying the smoke of the fire into her lungs. She coughed, the sound breaking the silence. And the warriors resumed their laughter, jeering at her defiance. But in her chest, Eleanor felt the faintest stirring of triumph. She had spoken. She had defied. And for one impossible heartbeat, she had shaken the uncheckable. The canyon had been alive with echoes that afternoon. The wheels of Eleanor Briggs's wagon grinding over stones, the mule's hooves striking sparks against flint. The sun blazed overhead, relentless, pressing down on her shoulders with a weight. That felt like a punishment. She had been alone for 3 days, her only company the creak of the wagon and the glass, bottles clinking together and the back vials of medicine wrapped carefully in cloth. She had promised the miners up in Red Hollow that she would bring them quinine. Men were dying of fever in those hills, coughing blood into rags, and she had sworn, though she was just one woman, a widow, that she would not let them die without a fight. Thomas would have wanted her to do it. He had always believed that. Strength was not measured in the size of a ranch or the weight of a gun, but in the courage to act when no one else would. But as the canyon walls rose higher, closing her into their jagged jaws, Eleanor felt a prickle of unease. The silence was wrong. Even the mule's braying sounded too loud, too exposed. She scanned the cliff edges, hand tightening on the reins, but saw only sun-bleached rock and sky so blue it looked like enamel. Then it happened. A shrill whistle split the air, sharp as a hawk's cry. The mule reared, nearly toppling the wagon. From the cliffs above, shadows poured like water horses and riders, swift and silent, their faces streaked with paint, their war cries echoing until the canyon itself seemed to tremble. Eleanor's breath caught. She yanked the reins, but the mule bucked and stumbled. The wagon lurched, throwing bottles into a shattering symphony behind her. She tried to stand, to grab the rifle from the seat, but before she could lift it, a figure on horseback swooped down like a storm. A hand, strong and unyielding, caught her by the arm and wrenched her from the seat. She fell hard against the rider's chest, air knocked from her lungs. The world spun sky, canyon walls, hooves striking stone, and then she was across the saddle of a horse that smelled of sweat and leather. Her captor urged the animal forward, and the canyon became a blur of dust and thunder. Eleanor thrashed, kicking, clawing at the arm that held her, but the man only tightened his grip. His body was solid as iron, his muscles shifting beneath bare skin that radiated heat. She tilted her head, desperate to see his face, and caught a glimpse of black hair whipping in the wind, jewelry flashing at his throat, paint streaking the hard lines of his cheekbones. Tako. Though she did not yet know his name, the sight of him burned into her memory like a brand. His eyes, when they flicked down to meet hers, were not wild like the others. They were controlled, deep, unreadable. The other warriors rode around them, shouting, laughing, their voices bouncing off the canyon walls. One of them grabbed at her skirts, jeering, until Takoda barked a command in a language she could not understand. Instantly, the man fell back, his laughter souring into silence. The authority in Takoda's voice left no room for challenge. When at last they reached the mouth of the canyon, Eleanor's head was pounding, her throat dry from the dust. The sun dipped lower, throwing long shadows across the desert floor, and she realized with a sinking heart that she had no idea where they were taking her. The riders slowed only when they reached a cluster of cottonwoods near a shallow river. There, a hidden camp revealed itself, tents of hide, smoke curling from fires, children darting between horses. Women looked up from their tasks, eyes narrowing at the sight of Eleanor, the pale-skinned stranger draped across Takoda's horse. He swung down effortlessly, then pulled her with him. Eleanor's knees buckled on the ground, but before she could scramble away, his hand closed around her arm. Strong, possessive, not cruel, but unyielding. He handed the reins to another man, then dragged her forward into the heart of the camp. She stumbled, her boots catching in the sand, her dress torn at the hem. All around her, eyes followed, some mocking, some suspicious, a few curious. She heard whispers in Apache, the rise and fall of words she could not grasp, but their tone was clear enough. She did not belong here. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Eleanor was bound at the wrists and seated near a fire. The night air bit sharp, the flames painting faces around her in hues of gold and shadow. Her chest still heaved from the ride, her heart refusing to slow. And then, as if the fire itself had summoned him, Takoda stepped into the circle. Shirtless, glistening with sweat and dust, his long black hair catching the glow, his presence silenced the camp. He stood tall, eyes fixed only on her. Eleanor met his gaze, refusing to bow her head. She had lost her wagon, her supplies, her freedom. But she would not lose her will, for in that moment, bound and surrounded, Eleanor Briggs made a silent vow. They might have her body, but they would never truly have her. The camp was quiet now, save for the low murmur of the river nearby and the occasional crackle of fire. Eleanor Briggs sat on the coarse sand, her wrists still bound, the leather cords chafing her skin. Her heart pounded not from exhaustion alone, but from the presence of the man she had seen in the canyon, the warrior who had captured her, whose gaze had burned into her soul. Takoda stood a few paces away, his silhouette sharp against the firelight. Shirtless, his dark skin streaked with ceremonial paint, muscles taut beneath tribal tattoos, he seemed carved from the desert itself. Each movement, each subtle shift of weight, radiated power and control. Eleanor's pulse jumped every time he took a step closer, every time his long black hair brushed across his broad shoulders. She tried not to look at him directly, but the firelight betrayed her. Takoda's eyes, dark, deep, and unsettling, followed her every movement. Unlike the others, he did not jeer or sneer. He did not even glance at the women in the camp as if they were prey. His attention was fixed solely on her, and that focus was more suffocating than any rope. Finally, he crouched down before her, settling onto one knee, the firelight dancing across the sharp planes of his face. Eleanor flinched instinctively, but something in his expression made her pause. It was not cruelty she saw, not yet. It was curiosity. A deep, unrelenting curiosity, almost like he was trying to read her soul. "Your name?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, almost melodic despite the rough edges. Eleanor lifted her chin, refusing to let fear govern her reply. "Eleanor Briggs," she said, each word deliberate. "And yours?" His eyes darkened for a brief instant, and he said nothing. Then, in a voice that carried authority, he finally spoke. "Takoda." The name hit her ears with a weight she could not explain, like it belonged somewhere deep in the canyon itself. Takoda. The man who had stolen her freedom, yet seemed almost human in his precision, his restraint. Around them, the camp was alive with quiet activity. Children ran between tents, women tended fires, and the other warriors lounged nearby, keeping watch. But for Eleanor, the world had narrowed to the space between her and Takoda. Every instinct screamed danger, yet a strange, uninvited fascination tugged at her chest. Takoda leaned slightly closer, eyes studying her face. "You defy me," he said, a statement rather than a question. "Why?" Eleanor met his gaze head on, though her wrists throbbed from the ropes and her chest burned from the ride. "Because I am not yours to command," she said firmly. "You may have captured my body, but my will belongs to no one, not you, not anyone. For a long moment, Takoda said nothing. Then he tilted his head slightly, a faint shadow of something like admiration flickering in his dark eyes. "Strong," he murmured. "Like the rivers that cut through these canyons, unyielding, dangerous." Her heart lurched. The words were not a threat, nor a compliment in the way Thomas had once offered. They were a recognition of something, deeper something in her spirit that refused to bow. Even in the face of overpowering force, the fire shifted, sending a ripple of sparks into the night air. Eleanor shivered, not just from the cold desert wind, but from the intensity of the moment. Takoda's presence was suffocating yet intoxicating, terrifying yet magnetic. She could feel the tension radiating from his taut muscles, the heat of his skin against the cool night air, the raw power contained in his every movement. "Do you always defy?" he asked quietly, his voice almost a whisper now, brushing against her ear as he leaned forward slightly. "I defy who deserves it," she replied, refusing to flinch, though her pulse raced and her hands itched to free themselves from the bindings. "And anyone who thinks they own me is already mistaken." The moment stretched, a fragile electric thread between them. For the first time, Takoda's mask of unreadable authority faltered, if only for an instant. Eleanor caught a flicker of something she could not name, perhaps curiosity, perhaps respect, perhaps hesitation. The fire hissed, throwing sparks into the night sky. Around them, the camp carried on, but for Eleanor Briggs, time had slowed. She was trapped, bound, and utterly at the mercy of this warrior. Yet for the first time, she felt a strange sense of clarity. The battle was no longer just for her body. It was for her spirit, and in that, she held a power Takoda had not yet claimed. The desert night had cooled, and the firelight flickered across Eleanor Briggs's pale face as she sat on the coarse sand, wrists still bound. Her eyes followed Takoda as he moved around the fire, his muscular form bare and painted with tribal markings, the turquoise and bone jewelry clinking softly with each step. The shadows on the ground stretched and twisted, creating the illusion that he was larger than life, a storm contained in human form. Eleanor's mind was a whirlwind of memory and fear. She remembered Thomas, her husband, now buried beneath the wide Wyoming sky. He had been strong, tender, the anchor of her life, and losing him had left a void so deep she thought she would drown in it. Every day since his death had been a test of endurance, every night a battle against despair. And now, here she was, caught in the canyon, surrounded by warriors, her freedom stolen in a single, swift attack. Takoda's eyes found hers again, dark and searching. He crouched before her once more, the firelight highlighting the planes of his face and the strength in his shoulders. For the first time, Eleanor allowed herself to look directly into his gaze, not with fear, but with the faintest spark of curiosity. "You speak of someone else," he said, his voice low, controlled, carrying a weight that made her chest tighten. "A man who owns your heart, even now?" Eleanor swallowed hard, the memory of Thomas's warm hands, his quiet laughter, and the soft click of his boots against the wooden floor of their ranch rising in her chest like smoke. "Yes," she said firmly. "He's gone, but my body, my heart, they are his. You cannot claim what was never yours." Takoda's eyes narrowed, but there was no anger there, only a shadow of something unspoken, almost unreadable. His gaze flicked to the small ring that rested against her chest, the silver chain catching the firelight, her wedding band. He reached toward it with a careful hand, his long fingers brushing the fabric of her dress, and Eleanor flinched instinctively. "Thomas Briggs," he murmured, his voice almost reverent, as though saying the name gave it power. "You honor him even in captivity." Eleanor's pulse raced. She had expected rage, cruelty, or impatience. Instead, there was recognition. Even in a man who could command warriors who had captured her without a second thought, there was an acknowledgement of her past, her grief, and her love. Around them, the camp murmured with activity. Children laughed softly, unaware of the tension between the two adults. Other warriors moved in the shadows, their eyes flicking between Eleanor and Takoda, but no one dared to speak. It was as if even they sensed the invisible battle raging. Between the widow and the warrior, Eleanor tightened her jaw. "I will not betray his memory," she said. "I will not give what is not mine to give. You may have my body for this night, but my soul, that is his." Takoda leaned back slightly, the muscles of his chest rippling as he shifted weight, but his dark eyes never left hers. For a moment, Eleanor thought she saw hesitation, a crack in the otherwise impenetrable armor of his expression. Then, in a voice both commanding and quiet, he said, "Then you shall remain untouched, not out of mercy, but because no one will take what belongs to another." The words struck Eleanor like a shockwave. She blinked, uncertain if she had heard correctly. Takoda, the warrior who had captured her, whose presence had dominated the canyon and the camp, was offering her a choice. Not just survival, but dignity. For the first time since the ambush, Eleanor allowed herself a deep breath. The rope still cut into her wrists, the fire still burned her skin with its heat, but a fragile sense of hope flickered in her chest. She was a prisoner, yes, but she was also a woman whose will remained unbroken. Takoda leaned closer again, his voice a whisper that carried both warning and something else Eleanor could not name. "You honor him, and in doing so, you honor yourself. That makes you dangerous." Eleanor's lips curved into the faintest smile. She had faced death in the canyon, the cold bite of the desert night, and now she faced a man who could have claimed her entirely and resisted. In that, she found strength. The fire popped, sending a flurry of sparks into the night sky, and the world seemed to pause. Eleanor knew the days ahead would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. But she also knew this. Takoda, the warrior, was no longer just an enemy. He was a mirror, a reflection of power, of respect, and of the impossible tension between survival and the heart. And in that reflection, Eleanor Briggs saw a chance to claim something no one could ever take from her, her spirit. The first hints of dawn crept over the canyon, painting the sky in muted gold and pink. Eleanor Briggs stirred on the coarse sand, the leather cords around her wrists biting into her skin as she shifted. Her body ached from the ride, her muscles stiff from exhaustion, yet her mind remained alert, scanning the camp and the shadowed figures moving among the fires. Takoda stood nearby, shirtless, his muscular frame glowing in the early light. His long black hair, streaked with dust and sweat, fell over his shoulders as he adjusted the bone and turquoise jewelry around his neck. The other warriors, muscular and painted, had gathered in a loose circle, their eyes flicking between him and Eleanor. Silence stretched thick across the camp, the only sound the low murmur of the river and the crackle of fire. "You will be tested," Takoda said quietly so that only Eleanor could hear. "The spirits demand it. Those who are strong in body but weak in spirit, they do not survive this place. You will be judged by their eyes and by your own." Eleanor swallowed, her pulse quickening. She had survived ambush, captivity, and a ride that left her raw and bruised. But a trial set by a warrior like Takoda, whose strength and authority seemed as boundless as the desert itself, was something she could not fully anticipate. The children of the camp ran past, carrying water and tending horses, oblivious to the tension in the circle of adults. Eleanor's gaze swept over the warriors, noting how each of them shifted uneasily under Takoda's gaze. Even they seemed to recognize her defiance, the unyielding fire in her green eyes. "Stand," Takoda commanded, stepping closer, the muscles in his chest rippling as he moved. His voice carried authority without raising, a force that demanded obedience not through fear, but presence. Eleanor hesitated, then carefully rose, testing her bound wrists with cautious movements. The warriors stepped back, forming a wide semicircle around her. Takoda's eyes bore into hers, and for a long moment, Eleanor felt as if she could not breathe. This was no ordinary test. It was a challenge of spirit, endurance, and willpower, a confrontation with not just the warrior before her, but with the world she had endured alone since Thomas's death. "You have survived death before," Takoda said, his voice softer, now almost reflective. "And yet, the spirit can break where the body will endure. Show me that yours is unbroken." Eleanor lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. The memory of Thomas flashed vividly in her mind. His steady hands, his unwavering presence, the life they had built together, and the way he had loved her wholly. She drew a slow, deliberate breath and spoke with a voice that carried across. "The sand and firelight, my spirit belongs to me," she said. "Not to anyone who claims it. Not to fear, not to threats, not even to you. I survive because I choose to, and I endure because I remember those who are gone." Takoda's eyes darkened, but there was a flicker of something Eleanor could not name. Respect, perhaps, or curiosity, perhaps both. Around the camp, whispers rose. Some warriors nodded subtly, others exchanged glances, sensing that this woman was no ordinary captive. She was fierce, unbroken, and her defiance carried weight even in this alien world. For the first time, Takoda allowed himself a small shift of posture, a subtle acknowledgement that Eleanor's strength was real. He stepped back slightly, giving her space, though his gaze never wavered. "The spirits will watch," he said, "and I will see. But remember, your choices here matter more than your words." The fire crackled, sending sparks into the dawn sky, and Eleanor felt the first real flicker of hope since her capture. She was still bound, still surrounded by strangers and warriors, still facing the unknown. But in that moment, she recognized a truth deeper than fear. Takoda was not just a captor. He was a mirror, a judge, and perhaps even an unexpected protector. As the sun rose higher, the desert came alive with light, revealing the stark cliffs, the flowing river, and the camp bustling quietly with life. Eleanor brushed a strand of hair from her face, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. She did not yet know what the trial would demand, what challenges awaited her. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would meet them. Head on, unbroken, her spirit untouchable. Takoda watched her silently, the muscles of his chest taut, the firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. Around him, the warriors waited, curious, tense, and silent. And in that tense morning, the canyon seemed to hold its breath, watching the defiance of one determined woman and the growing, complex fascination of a warrior who had never met anyone like her. The sun had risen higher now, burning away the mist of dawn and turning the desert air into a dry, heated pulse that pressed against Eleanor Briggs's skin. She sat near the fire, wrists still bound, her torn riding dress clinging to her from sweat and dust. Each movement reminded her of the ride through the canyon, the grip of Takoda's powerful hands, and the relentless weight of the desert. Her muscles ached, her chest rose and fell with exhaustion, but her mind remained razor-sharp, every sense alert to the shifting energy of the camp. Takoda moved through the camp like a force of nature, muscular, shirtless, painted with tribal markings. His long black hair caught in the sunlight and shimmered with strands of turquoise and bone jewelry that glinted with each motion. He carried himself with an authority that seemed absolute, commanding the respect of warriors who otherwise might have challenged his rule. And yet, Eleanor noted, There was something in his gaze that no command could contain, a flicker of intrigue, a silent acknowledgment of her unbroken spirit. She shifted her position, careful not to draw unnecessary attention from the others. The warriors, sensing the growing tension between the two of them, had begun to step back slightly, murmuring quietly among themselves. Children ran about, carrying water, tending horses, while women prepared food near the edges of the firelight. Yet despite the bustle, the air between Eleanor and Takoda was charged, almost tangible, crackling with unspoken words. "Your defiance is unusual," Takoda said, stepping closer, his voice low and measured. The tone was not anger, nor entirely. Curiosity, it was a mixture of both, laced with something Eleanor could not name. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "I do not surrender my will to anyone," she replied, her voice firm despite the ache in her chest. "You may have captured me, but you will not break me." His dark eyes narrowed, the shadow of a smile brushing across his lips. He knelt slightly, the muscles in his chest and shoulders flexing as he lowered his gaze to hers. "You honor someone who is gone, and yet you remain here before me. That takes courage more than most possess. But courage is only the beginning." Eleanor's pulse quickened, a mix of fear and something she refused to name. She remembered Thomas, the warmth of his hand, the soft steadiness of his voice, the life they had shared. She drew a deep, deliberate breath, feeling the heat of the sun on her back, the firelight flickering against Takoda's painted chest, the weight of his presence pressing on her senses. Around the camp, whispers rose. Some warriors looked uneasy, sensing the growing tension, the unspoken connection that neither Eleanor nor Takoda acknowledged aloud. Even the women glanced between the two of them, noting the power struggle that was not just physical, but spiritual. And emotional. Takoda leaned closer, his voice a whisper now, brushing against her ear. "Do you know why you fascinate me?" Eleanor lifted her chin, refusing to flinch. "Because you cannot control me," she said, her words steady despite the tremor in her voice. "And I will not be claimed by fear or by force." For the first time, Takoda allowed himself a pause, studying her closely. The firelight flickered across his dark eyes, casting them in shades of molten shadow. He saw strength, defiance, and a kind of raw beauty that could not be tamed. In the silence that followed, Eleanor realized something extraordinary. The warrior who had captured her was beginning to respect her, not as a possession, but as an equal, in spirit if not in circumstance. The wind carried dust and sparks across the desert floor. Eleanor brushed a strand of hair from her face, her wrist sore and raw, her breath ragged. And yet, she felt a surge of determination unlike anything she had known in the 2 years since Thomas's death. Takoda had challenged her physically, emotionally, and spiritually, but he had not broken her. He rose slowly, the muscles in his chest rippling, and stepped back. Around them, the camp settled into an uneasy rhythm, the warriors unsure of how to act in the presence of this silent, simmering tension. Takoda's gaze never left Eleanor, and for a fleeting moment, she thought. She saw something like hesitation in his dark eyes, a crack in the unyielding mask he wore for the world. Eleanor exhaled, steadying herself, and knew this. The coming days would test her in ways far beyond what the desert or a violent ambush could deliver. But she also understood that Takoda, this fierce, unyielding warrior, was no longer simply her captor. He was a challenge, a reflection of her own strength, and perhaps in ways she could not yet name, a force that might change her life forever. The sun dipped low behind the canyon walls, turning the desert sky into a riot of crimson and gold. Eleanor Briggs shifted on the coarse sand, her wrists raw from the leather cords that still bound them. The ride, the ambush, the long hours in. The camp hall had brought her to this moment. Her chest rose and fell with steady breaths, her green eyes fixed on Takoda, who now stood before her like a storm contained in human form. Takoda's long black hair fell across his shoulders, dust and sweat clinging to the muscles of his chest. Tribal paint marked his skin in bold, swirling lines, and the bone and turquoise jewelry around his neck glinted in the dying firelight. His eyes, dark, unreadable, and intense, locked on hers, and Eleanor felt the familiar pull of fear, fascination, and defiance all at once. "Tonight," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "the spirits will judge not only your strength, but your heart. You have defied, resisted, endured. But will you survive the choice that comes next?" Eleanor held her chin high. She had faced death in the canyon, exhaustion under the sun, and the constant gaze of warriors who saw her as prey. She had endured Takoda's scrutiny and the challenge of surviving in an alien world, and her defiance had not faltered. "I will survive because I choose to," she said, "and my heart belongs to no one but the memory of my husband." Takoda's expression softened, though only slightly. He knelt before her, the muscles in his chest shifting as he leaned closer, the firelight casting deep shadows on his painted skin. "You honor him, and in doing so, you honor yourself," he murmured. Few could carry such courage without breaking. Eleanor felt a strange warmth rise in her chest, not fear, nor relief, but recognition. For the first time since her capture, she saw Takoda not merely as her captor, but as a man shaped by his own code, bound by his honor, and capable of understanding strength beyond force. Around the camp, warriors shifted in silence, the tension palpable. Even the women and children sensed the weight of the moment, the fragile balance between captivity and respect, fear and admiration. Eleanor's eyes swept the circle briefly, noting how Takoda's influence held absolute sway, yet he had chosen restraint. Acknowledging her spirit rather than crushing it, he reached out, brushing a strand of dusted hair from her cheek. Eleanor flinched, then held her ground. His fingers lingered, warm against her skin, a silent acknowledgement of the struggle they had shared, not of body, but of spirit. "You have survived this trial," Takoda said, standing tall again. "Not because I spared you, but because you were never mine to break. Your strength, your defiance, they belong to you and no one else." Eleanor's breath hitched slightly, the weight of relief and victory settling over her. She had been captured, tested, and watched, yet her spirit remained unbroken. She met Takoda's gaze not with fear, but with the quiet strength that had carried her through every peril. "Then I am free?" she asked softly, the words trembling with exhaustion and hope. Takoda's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "You were never bound here, not truly. Only the unworthy are broken by chains, and you are worthy." The fire crackled, sparks dancing into the night sky as the warriors stepped back, a collective acknowledgement of her courage and survival. Eleanor slowly rose, her hands brushing the cords that had bound her. She flexed her wrists, feeling strength return and the first true sense of freedom in days coursing through her veins. Takoda's gaze lingered, intense and unreadable, yet no longer threatening. There was respect there now, and perhaps the hint of something more, a recognition of a spirit as fierce as his own. Untamed and unbroken. As the sun set completely, casting the canyon in shades of violet and crimson, Eleanor breathed in the desert air, tasting freedom for the first time since her capture. She had survived the canyon, the warriors, the test, and even the silent pull of a warrior whose presence had loomed over her like fire. In that moment, Eleanor Briggs realized that survival was more than endurance. It was defiance, courage, and the ability to claim one's own spirit, no matter the odds. And for the first time since the ambush, she felt truly whole, truly alive, and entirely herself. Takoda stepped back into the firelight, his chest rising and falling with steady strength. Around them, the camp settled into a quiet rhythm, the warriors understanding that a challenge had been met, and that a woman of extraordinary courage had earned her place among them, even if only in respect, if not in freedom. And as the stars began to pierce the night sky, Eleanor Briggs knew one truth above all: no chains, no warrior, no desert could ever claim her spirit. It was hers alone,